table stakes. Table stakes were the minimum that you needed to know to even be in the game. And what's happened in the last couple of years is that media analytics have become table stakes. It's hard for you to get a seat at a good game unless you can ante up basic familiarity with table stakes. That's as far as I'll extend that metaphor, but I see Tim saying, oh yeah, thanks. In any case, this is an introduction to media analytics. There's no way I can teach you how to do media analytics in the amount of time that we have available. What I can do is give you a quick introduction to the fundamental concept of media analytics and talk about how you really have to focus on the process and how that process works with your content strategy, because you can always go online and learn the tools. And we'll talk about some of the specific tools, and I'll show you some. I'll show you one as well. But what's hard to find online is the conceptual foundation that's going to help you do better analytics. And believe me, there are lots of ways to waste your time in analytics. There are so many bells and whistles, so many different kinds of information available. That doesn't mean it's going to help you or your media organization. So I'm going to start with a very simple question. What do you know about media analytics? And by media analytics, I mean in this case, web analytics or social media analytics. How many of you are doing analytics on a website or a social media account now? One. What are you doing?
I'm actually a PR grad student.
Okay.
And I work in the center just across the hall. We do social media analytics for our clients.
Okay, great.
So Facebook and Twitter.
All right. Now when I talk about some specific examples, I'm going to use Google Analytics. Social media analytics turn out to be a lot more complex because there's so many different social media platforms, and the tools are often more expensive as well. Google Analytics is free. But anybody else? All right.
I don't specifically, but I know daily news we do.
Yeah.
And then we go over it in meetings.
All right. So you get analytics shared with you.
Yeah.
And that's what, for a lot of content creators and content publishers, that's what your role will be. Your role will not be to be the analyst. Your role will be to interpret the information that you get from an analyst. And that includes helping the analyst know what to ask. And that's why that's going to be a key focus of this presentation. So how are you using it now in your student media? Daily News, Ball State Daily site uses analytics. Is AJ in charge of analytics this year?
He's in charge of
Social media. Rachel Podner.
Podner.
Right. She took the web analytics course last spring, and she's taking the social media analytics course this fall. So it's developed in those platforms. Ball Bearings Online. They use a WordPress platform, but WordPress has an add-in for Google Analytics. And they changed their content strategy this year. And they've been using analytics to identify the impact of that change. And what they've done is they've driven their traffic up considerably. All right. So I know Byte wants to move more into analytics. I'm not sure what WCRD, anybody here from WCRD? Not sure what WCRD is doing. They have a website, as well as a broadcast. So, but no matter what you're doing, it's always possible to do more. And the question is, what should you do and what should you not do as you work to enhance your analytics? Analytics in general is the discovery and communication. Notice the communication. It's not just finding it out, but it's sharing it with your boss, your clients, your editor, whatever. The discovery and communication of meaningful patterns in data. I love it when I take PowerPoint across Mac and PC because you end up with these font substitutions that screw everything up. And I didn't have a chance to test this. Don't do this, by the way. Do as I say, not as I do. So why should you care? Because, as I said, this is table stakes now. Everything is about measurement. We live in an attention economy. You've heard that phrase before by now, I'm sure. Back, even when I was your age, we had 10 or 12 cable stations, we had broadcast radio, we had newspapers. We didn't have the internet, right? We had CB radios. That's how old I am. And content publishers could count on really dependable ways of getting my attention. They knew I was likely to be reading a magazine, reading a newspaper, watching television, listening to the radio, going to the movies. Right? But now, you have more television. It's hard to even define what television is anymore. You have more video sources than you can possibly imagine. You have millions and millions of hours of video and audio content available to you. You have all of the access. I mean, for example, growing up in northern Minnesota, it was hard for me to get a weekday Minneapolis Star Tribune newspaper. Now, if I want to read The Guardian, UK, a very good paper, online, I can do that. So the question is, how does The Guardian get me to read them rather than BBC.com? So it's all about strategy and competing for the audience's attention, getting their attention, engaging them. That's a very key concept. Engaging them and holding their attention and getting them to take action. Right? That's what it's all about now. But that means you need to know what's working and what's not. You need to measure performance of your content. If you can't measure it, can you manage it? That's an old truism in management schools and MBA programs. You can evaluate how you're doing, not only in terms to your past performance, but also to industry benchmarks. A lot of industries, there are benchmarks. This is kind of what we expect as a bounce rate for this kind of website. This is what we expect as a share rate for this kind of branded content. It establishes credibility. It's not, I think it's working, or I'm not sure why it's not working. It's, I know it's working, or it's not working, and the data tells me why it might not be working, and allows you to gauge success. So these are all very important things. If you are in public relations or advertising, you live and die by metrics, not just web and social media metrics, but by a whole host of metrics. It's all about measurement. There's a new standard for measurement in public relations called the Barcelona Principles. If you're a public relations student, you'll hear about those. And they have a lot to say about media measurement. If you are a journalist, whether it's a magazine or a newspaper, you're going to have an online platform. And you're going to have your analytics in real time available to you, if it's of any size at all. And you'll be expected to understand what those analytics are telling you, and to know that, gosh, I need to go in and tweak the headline because that story should be going better. Or something's wrong with that lead because people come to the page and then they bounce out before they can have time to read a paragraph. All right? So you'll need to use this stuff. We're going to talk today about two general classes of analytics. Web analytics, and these are on page. There are some off-page web analytics that we won't even get into, which is measurement of visitors' behavior on your website. And you compare that to what you want it to be, or what past trends have been, what your goals are. You have social media analytics. Typically you're looking at, up here, the emphasis is heavily on traffic and time, bounce rate. Right? Did they come to our site? Did they visit more than one page? How did they get to our site? Was it through a search engine? Was it through a link that we shared on social media or whatever? Down here, it's a little bit more about the content. Things like how many retweets, how many shares, how many likes, dislikes, etc. you get are important, but you're often dealing with identifying topics and sentiments, and to see how social media is driving traffic to your website. The website used to be, the old media ecosystem, television was the 800-pound gorilla. There was television and everything else orbited around it. Nowadays, arguably, in the content competition for attention, the website for most brands and most content publishers, the website is central and everything else rotates around the website. That may change. Social media are becoming increasingly important, not just as ways of driving traffic to your website, and then we have to figure out what's going to happen with apps as well. So, here's some things you can do with web analytics. You can evaluate your content quality. Time on page, for example, is a great indicator of content quality. Did somebody actually finish reading this screen, or were they gone? You can compare over time. How's our traffic compared to a month ago or a year ago? We did this redesign. What's before and after? We started this new content section. How many new visitors, or did we just shift our current visitors from viewing these pages to viewing these pages? All right, so comparative analysis. You can challenge and validate your assumptions. All of us make assumptions about our audiences and about our content all the time. They're often wrong. Let me give you my favorite example. And this is from last spring. Number of daily news students in the web analytics class. We're talking about analytics for the daily news. We haven't actually set them up yet at that point in the class. They had their own, of course. And these students thought, we're doing a lot on Twitter to drive traffic to the website. We think Twitter is more important as a social media for generating traffic to Ball State Daily than Facebook is. After all, 9,000 some followers on Twitter and only 4,000 some on Facebook. But if you look at the analytics, the assumption was wrong. Much more traffic comes from links that have been posted on Facebook into the daily site than from links that have been posted on Twitter into the daily site. Now, what you do with that, that's a strategic decision. Does that mean you have to change your Twitter strategy? We really ought to be doing better, so let's figure out what best practices are in Twitter and why what we're doing isn't working. Or do you say, we really ought to, for the time being, put more emphasis on Facebook, because that's what's driving the traffic. So, you test and validate your assumptions. And you find out how your website meets your organizational goals and your users' needs. Because ultimately, you are communicators. You're either strategic communicators in advertising and public relations. Might be somebody here from marketing. We've had some marketing students in the classes. Or you're news and information providers. You need to know, are you meeting users' needs with that news and information or with that strategic content? And you need to know whether or not you're meeting your organizational goals. You want an audience. Right? That's one of the fundamental organizational goals of student media. Right? What if we told you that none of the student media have any audience whatsoever, that it's a closed loop? So it's just like content you're generating in class for the instructor, maybe for some other students, but nobody else ever sees it. Would you want to spend your time and energy on that? No. It isn't real until you have an audience. So you need to know, are we meeting our goal of building our audience and building particular kinds of audiences because you want to sell particular kinds of audiences to your advertisers? And are we meeting that audience's needs? Okay. So I'll show you Google Universal Analytics a little later. This is an example, not a particularly good one. If you do just a standard predefined report in Google, one of the nice things that they give you is a map of where your traffic is coming from. Well, if you're not an international company, your map always looks like this. All right? Bulk of your traffic is coming from the United States. Well, yeah, we kind of expected that. All right? So you replace that with one that gives you regional cities, for example. All right? But it tells you where your landing pages are. We used to talk about the home page. You know what a home page is, right? It's like the basic page, the first page you'd go to, just logging into or visiting Ball State Daily, for example, or Bike. They're not important anymore. It's a little bit of hyperbole. They're important for some kinds of sites. But so much of your traffic is coming from links posted in social media and from search engines, you have to think about landing pages. Landing pages, not the home page, but where people come into the site. Right? Like maybe people just never go to the Ball State Daily homepage and just go straight to the sports page. Right? You need to know. For a lot of people, that's the landing page. They may never see that homepage. So then you have to think about how do we get them out of the sports page into other content. And you can see changes over time. It's fun looking at this with student media, because if you look at it in a year, what happens in the summer? Boom. And then boom, back up in the fall. What happens during the week? Boom on the weekend. And then you have an alternating pattern through the week. A little bit busier later in the week as people are planning their weekend. All right. So you set up dashboards that provide information that you can use. This is very high-level stuff. This doesn't help you with specific stories much. Social media analytics. Some people would say that the first one isn't really a form of analytics. Listening is watching the content for topics and secondarily for sentiment. A lot of ideas for news stories can come from watching social media, finding out what popular search terms and hashtags are, following them, etc. Finding out how people are feeling about something that's going on. There are tools you can play with if you have a blog. How many of you blog? I know it's so old school. You got to offer to blog for the president.
I saw him last night, actually. I ran into his Scotties, so I should have asked him then.
Yeah. Hey, I see there's hasn't been anything on your blog since May. Let me write something for you. There are free tools. Google Universal Analytics, a little complicated to set up the first time. There's a personal version of Hootsuite. Hootsuite is content curation and analytics for your social media. So you can like line up different posts to be posted at different times of the day. And you can track what your competitors are posting and all that. Simply Measured offers some free tools. There are native tools in the social media platforms. Almost every social media platform has its own native analytics tool, and most of these are designed for the casual end user. Some of them have business versions of them, like LinkedIn. The one that doesn't have, makes sense, Snapchat, right? The whole idea is the content disappears. Well, that means it's almost impossible to do the analytics. Now, there's an external vendor now saying, we can do analytics on Snapchat. So we'll see whether or not Snapchat comes back and says, nah, we're going to provide that. Some professional grade tools, and again, these are free. Chartbeat, there is a free trial version, but you'd have to be able to have access for the installation on the website. Hootsuite Pro, which actually is free for students if an instructor enrolls a class. Students have access to it for 90 days. We did that for the social media analytics class, and we had our first training on Hootsuite Pro on Tuesday. Moz, Nuvi, Simply Measured, Sysomos is a big corporate level tool. The main thing is, you can learn a lot just by, for example, using Hootsuite and doing basic analysis of your own social media. Your personal brand building. And all of you should be building your personal brand, because if you're a communication professional, you absolutely must have a professional brand. Again, it's table stakes.